Speaking of pruning, why don't you talk about a servicer you're no longer going to be using?
Usually I'm the one that has the really great segues, but apparently today it is on you and you are nailing it. Over the past week and a half, to go back even further, one of the new-ish kids on the block for servicing your notes, servicing your loans.
First, seconds, performing, non-performing? What the f***? Note buyers, when it seems like you're in this business alone, know Chase, Robert, and the rest of their tribe are at it every week. They're bringing updates from their own note businesses as they work to find, fund, and finish deals. Follow along as they share their grassroots education with you, tuition free. If you'd like to know more about what they do and to download the entire back catalog, check out NoteMBA.com. Now, here are your hosts, Chase Thompson and Robert Woods.
Hey, everybody, welcome to the Note MBA podcast, your home for note investing on iTunes. I am Chase Thompson, joined as always by Robert Woods. Mr. Woods, what is up? How are you doing today, bud?
Still pondering if we should change the intro. You know?
The whole thing?
Updating it? I don't know.
Yeah.
Talked about it.
We have talked about it. Talked about updating the logo, updating the intro, just updating the whole, just set the whole thing on fire. Just start over again. Just slash and burn all of the things.
Well, I have been pruning, so I've been creating a nice little pile.
Ooh. So we're going to dive right in, people. One of the topics today came to Mr. Woods from the great Michael Hyatt. He was a book publisher for a very long time, I believe, with Nielsen Publishing. It was I don't want to go out on a limb here, but I think it's a Christian publishing platform, or at least kind of leaned towards that way. Super smart dude, an amazing blogger. He's got hundreds of courses, I think, out online right now, most of which surround around the idea of like creating a business you want, writing books, things like that, obviously with his history as a book publisher. But this particular topic came to you, Mr. Woods, while listening to his podcast, correct?
Yeah, I got his newsletter, and it rang a bell because we had that episode a few weeks ago. We had a lot going on, and I kind of, as I said, I broke everything down, created a new plan, and that plan has been in action for the last 3 weeks, literally since we recorded that show. And it's been interesting just seeing it. So one of the things that popped up, he was like talking about admitting when you have stress or you have too much stress. And it was kind of some unique conversations I've had over the last couple of weeks. And it was like trying to explain that the stress was coming from a positive place, and like just saying, hey, we grew way too much, way too fast, which is great. Now we need to prune down some things. And it's interesting because I didn't have a word for it until I was listening to this podcast that Michael had done that came on earlier this week. And I looked at what I've been doing in the list of just like trying to just slash off old projects and get stuff taken off the list and say, great, we did it. Let's take it off the list. Let's focus on the core, get rid of some of this stuff and thin stuff down so we can actually go into a new season and grow a little more. So it's been interesting.
Mm-hmm. We've talked a little bit before about the fact that I used to have a lawn care business. And that's one of those things that I would, one of the best parts of the business that we had that we did so much better than a lot of other people is we didn't basically lop trees off, right? Like we would cut it back to where it needed to be cut back. We raised the canopy, as it were, right? Like the proper pruning. The thought of pruning makes me think of Karate Kid, I think, right? Where he's got like the bonsai tree where you like prune it up to like shape it up and all that kind of stuff. Cut away the waste so that way everything else can kind of grow. And I assume that is where we'll obviously have a link out to this particular podcast / newsletter if we can get it in the show notes of this week's show. But I assume that's kind of what he was talking about, right? Like cutting back the waste, pruning up, shaping yourself up to move in the direction you're trying to go.
That is exactly it. And it was great. You know, we got to a really good size. It was just a good external observation to have a word assigned to it. I just thought it was kind of interesting.
Interesting. Yeah. No, I dig it. And the second you mentioned it, it made total sense.
Speaking of pruning, why don't you talk about a servicer you're no longer going to be using?
Usually I'm the one that has the really great segues, but apparently today it is on you and you are nailing it. So over the past week and a half, in fact, to go back even further, one of the new-ish kids on the block for servicing your notes, servicing your loans, was Peak Servicing. They do a lot of other things, but specifically they have a servicing division that was apparently fantastic. We actually met one of the guys over there, John, for the first time. At least I met him for the first time at the Note Expo last year. right? It was last year, like last October, November-ish area. Super cool guy. Talked a lot about the services they had there. And then I finally got a loan in where I was like, this looks like it'll be prime. This will be great. We'll give Peak a shot. I don't want to go through all of the intricate details here unnecessarily. Suffice to say, Peak is closing down their servicing arm. So for anybody who thought that would be a service that they'd want to use, you might want to back that trolley up. You're not actually going to be able to use them for any of your servicing needs going forward.
How did you get notified that they were no longer going to be in the servicing business?
Funny you should mention, because we actually haven't talked in depth at all about this. I brought it up to you, and we were just like, we'll talk about it on the show. I didn't get notified, technically speaking. What happened was some other investors that I'm in groups on, the Facebook, LinkedIn, places like that, even through email, sent out messages like, hey, I just heard from Peak. Here's what they're doing. Hey, did you guys hear? Here's what's happening. So it just kind of became a thing, right?
The grapevine. You heard it through the grapevine.
I did hear it through the grapevine.
It took me by surprise, I must say, when I found out yesterday. Don't you know that I heard it through the grapevine?
Anyway, so the problem was...
We got to put that song in the background.
We do. I'll throw that up, do a little editing action. So the problem is I didn't hear from them. I heard nothing. In fact, I had to make the call to the contact I had there, which took a while to get anyway because I don't want to dive into the specifics of that situation. But I called the contact I had out there and I said, hey, what's going on? Here's what I'm hearing, but I'm not hearing it from you, which is disparaging in and of itself. But what is actually going on? So that way I know what I'm doing and how to move forward with this particular loan, obviously going forward. So they basically laid it out. They are shutting down the servicing arm of their business. They're going to focus on origination and some of the other things that they do. And they are working with another servicer to take on the loans that are currently in process, that they currently have, that they're currently servicing on, with no boarding fees, no transfer fees or anything like that. They will just take on these new loans. And I don't know what the new servicer, what the costs are for their services, as it were, but they will honor the Peak prices. So I don't know if that means they're usually more expensive or whatever. Yeah.
Well, there you go. I mean, they did have an article posted in July on their website called "The Importance of a Good Servicer."
Maybe that's when they were doing the shopping for this servicer for all of their current clients. They were like, "Wow, this is really important to have a good servicer because this is a total and complete cluster."
Well, it's interesting just because the last article from where I'm at on their peakservicing.com, it was in October 20th of 2015. And then an article in July called "The Importance of a Good Servicer."
We will be sure to link that up for everyone in the show notes that you can find at notemba.com. So now I'm obviously, since moving my loan, I don't have any desire to wait on whatever that process is going to be, whatever that agreement time is going to take. I'm just going to move it to the servicer I've been using. I don't think this will put a damper on potentially finding better vendors in the future. I don't think that is the way that you kind of continue to grow and evolve your business by I'll essentially call it being burned once, right? Like, obviously there's that shame on you, shame on me, blah, 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 whatever. But in this case, it just didn't work out.
I got a question though. This will be fun. What's the story with the note that you have at Peak? Do you have an investor on that?
I do.
How much do you think it's going to delay getting either payments or information? Like, have you primed? You just learned this, so now you got to prime the investor.
Right. So the benefit was not the benefit, but the situation with this particular deal was it took longer to board than I would have liked, just in general, which was a problem. I had to continue communication with him. So already I was like, I don't know if Peak's really going to be the place to go in the future. This was prior to obviously all of this information. This particular loan, this particular asset was actually already about 6 months into the foreclosure process in Illinois already. So we had them, once it was boarded, they sent out the goodbye, the hello, and all that action. And we've since been in communication with the attorneys that were already going through it. We've since now have counsel with them going forward with all of that. And it's just going through the process of all of that. So it didn't change a bunch with this loan, but it very well could have been a massive problem. Luckily, we didn't lose a ton of time. It's just a complete and utter nightmare considering what did transpire just for us and what could have transpired for a bunch of other people. I know other investors that have 10 to 15 loans with these guys that were newly boarded, as well as were in a process. So like, I don't even know where they're at regarding that. Obviously that wasn't my case, but yeah, it could be a total and complete nightmare for your business depending on where you're at with them.
Yeah, well, I guess in the big picture, if we go up like 30,000 feet, like it's not really going to be an issue for you at all.
No, because of the asset I had.
It worked out well, timing wise.
Yeah.
So you got lucky in the big picture.
Right. Yeah. Everybody else, sorry if you listen to the show and you have to speak, or if this is the first time you're hearing about it, you might want to get on the horn with them. But
speaking of getting lucky, we won't get into the direct address or the location of this property, but we had a deal a while ago that we bought for JV Investor. And when I was out in Napa, like 3 weeks ago, 3-4 weeks ago, I was out there twice, 2 weeks in a row. But I had to have a call with the investor and be like, hey, listen, not your money, because I put some money into the deal as well, but this deal's going to lose money. We're not going to make any money on this deal. It's trashed. And I had Jeff get on top of doing some grassroots marketing and outreach in that area to some people that had bought similar types of property before.
Yeah.
And where we thought we were going to lose, $5 to $10,000, closer to the $10,000, we just got an offer in. Looks like a pretty good offer. It's all cash, and we're going to break even on this deal.
Oh.
And this is what's interesting because it goes back to, remember, one of the things I've talked about in a lot of my in-person presentations was that property I bought in Kansas City. The first one I lost money on because I didn't record the tax bill.
Yeah.
But I also agreed to like a $2,500 flat commission on a property that wasn't worth anything. And I didn't do any like marketing. Nothing, no outreach, no grassroots, no Facebook, no anything. And I overpaid for it. And by doing it, we ended up saving probably $5,000 to $10,000.
Nice.
And just really being able to see a value put on, hey, let's take an extra week to do X, Y, and Z and see if we can get a couple of, offers in on these assets just from taking the extra time to do it. Is crazy. Where I could have been the easy way, what I had done before with just let's go out and list it traditionally. We're not going to do anything. And it doesn't work for it makes sense to go out traditional and list like nice properties. But these ones that are destroyed, that grassroots is the best way to go out there and go do it.
That's tremendous. And it's great that you got to obviously see both sides of the equation. Like, it's really cool to be like, hey, this is what you should do because this is probably a situation you can find yourself in. But in your case, it's like, yeah, guys, like that's real talk. Like if you don't take advantage of those opportunities of that just a 1 week's worth of, hounding and effort and hustle, all of a sudden just saved you a tremendous amount of money.
Oh, completely.
Also probably save face with the investor, though I think we weren't in a terrible position to begin with, but it's still a better position otherwise.
Well, we weren't in I don't perceive a terrible position ever because we had modeled the deal appropriately.
Yeah.
Had the property been in what we would like to assume the internal condition was, I mean, we'd be sitting on top of $25,000 in profit.
Yeah, exactly.
So instead of that, it was destroyed and we break even. I'm okay with that. Like that's really a win in the sense of getting into some of these properties where you just really don't know what's going on inside of them.
And that wasn't one that was held for super long either, correct?
Correct. I think we're in and out in under 8 months.
Yeah. Well, Okay, I'm glad to hear it. That's a fantastic update. I'm hearing it for the first time here on the show. I love that. So, just out of curiosity, not to dive back into a topic we've already covered, what are some principles that you would say, or how do you manage this idea of testing vendors? Like, I would like to know, because I obviously just tried, swing and a miss, obviously. For others out there.
I think it's just like any other decision we make. Is ideally the best decisions we make. We've invested some small time in research. We've gotten validation from people in the market.
Yep.
We've eased any of our concerns through an interview or a question and ask response thing. And then there's the ones where we go out and somebody said, hey, call this guy. And we just go call them with no expectations. Mm-hmm. I think with those vendors, you get what you go into it with an attitude of. Yeah. Where on the front end, you get the results of your research and your efforts. So here's a better way to put it. We had a really hard time finding a property manager in Chicago originally. And it's just not a market where I think it's a easy thing to find for the product that we have. But Jeff stayed on top of it and reached out to in the teens of property managers and went through them, asked them questions, got some reviews, looked at other properties that they manage. And I feel like we've landed on a really strong property manager in Chicago. On the flip side of it, I have a property up in Canton, Ohio, where there's like 2.5 property managers in the whole area. And I just picked one that responded to an email quick enough. One, because we weren't tight on the investment. We had a lot of room for some forgiveness and what we had to deal with from an operating perspective up in Canton. But that property manager's been a nightmare. I mean, I'm getting emails from the county that are utilities aren't getting paid, that aren't even supposed to come to me, just trying to get them to get a vendor out there to do repairs, getting a monthly statement that makes sense for the bookkeeping. And I emailed him last week about something, and I was like, hey, this looks really weird. These numbers in your statements don't add up to what I'm showing on my bank account. What's going on? And they're like, oh, yeah, well, the tenant hasn't paid, X amount of dollars every month. But, we called them about it. And I'm like, what, no 5-day notice? Like, you guys don't email me about this? And I was like, I noticed you took your property management fee out anyway, but you didn't collect all the rent. I'm a little confused why you took 100% of it. So in that case, we get it in trial and error. I think it's just like anything else we've all experienced.
Yeah.
And if it either A, has a higher value to you as an individual, or it has a higher material value, we've learned to expend more time doing it. So like that building in Chicago I've got has got a huge investment into it. So I wanted a comparable investment before we actually settled on a property manager. Canton, not so much. And we're getting the results we're getting are the fruits of our effort we put in on the front end. And it's at some point in our processes, like you and I have talked about the pruning right now, we'll get to a point where correcting the issues with that property manager is something that makes sense to address. But the value gained or the extra money gained right now by changing property managers there and dealing with it doesn't equate to the present value of the time we'd be investing to do that.
That's a perfect answer.
It seemed a little long-winded, was it?
Well, no. I mean, it's a great answer. The problem is that it's just like when you're in the middle of a disaster of a terrible vendor situation. It's like you just know all these things intuitively, and you're just like, oh, whatever. I don't care. Just blow everything up. This is dumb. But no, you're right. Obviously, the big thing for me is just trying not to get mired in the fact that well, I'm never going to, try another servicer, another property manager or whatever, because this last one was a complete disaster. Just continuing to understand that taking those at-bats, taking those swings, sometimes you are going to strike out with somebody, but other times you're going to find that property manager that just blows your mind with how efficient they are and effective they are and responsive they are or whatever, right? You're going to hit those grand slams just like you're going to strike out. You just have to, like you said, go and do as much research as you can to potentially, at least have a better opportunity to make contact with the ball, as it were.
Totally. And at the end of the day, it's your attitude. So Pete goes out of business. Who cares? Like, what's the worst thing that really is affecting for you right now? Now, some of our listeners with 10, 15, 20 loans, it's bothering them. But if like the worst part of your week is you've got to transition all of these loans that you own because life is so tough, you own these loans. Like, come on, really? Like, just, it's really not that bad. You still got clean water probably coming out of your kitchen faucet. You'll be okay.
Right. Sure. And speaking of attitude, that actually reminded me of something I saw just yesterday. My nephew goes to this school. It's kind of like a STEMS-ish school. If you're familiar, like a science, technology, engineering, mathematics, or whatever type of school. Anyway.
The charter schools.
Yeah, it's like a charter school, right? But it's brand new. They just built it. Like, they literally finished it not too long ago. It's fantastic. And so he's got to wear like a uniform type thing. And on his shirt, it's got the name of the school, right? It's like the Idea School or whatever. And then in like big bold letters right below that is the school motto. I guarantee you, if I gave you, 10 weeks, you couldn't come up with the school's motto. Like every school's kind of got like a different, like educations or whatever, their school motto is no excuses. I don't know why.
Is it a military charter school?
Yeah, no, not at all, actually. It's like totally academically driven. No military. In big, bold letters. You want to talk about attitude. You want to talk about direction that they're trying to teach these kids to go in. Like, Idea School with this big, bright light bulb, and then no excuses. Like, right below it. Just amazing to be teaching these young people the attitude of no excuses, I thought. Anyway, it just struck me really quickly when you're talking about attitude and all this kind of stuff. And right from the get-go, right from the jump, those guys are on top of it.
What's interesting, you said no excuses, because part of that stress subject, Michael Hyatt podcast, was talking about not saying no excuses, but also saying accepting responsibility.
Same thing, different, right? Same point, different side. Yeah.
You get to the same spot, just a different route.
Okay, last two things for the episode.
What do you got? I just have a weird sentence from a Forbes article.
That's one of them. I want to talk just briefly, just the sentence and kind of maybe a 2-second, extrapolation.
Well, we don't really get political on here, but it's. I was reading an older article from a Forbes magazine from May. And this is actually from editor-in-chief Steve Forbes, Obama's War on Prosperity. But I think let's not identify it there. But one of the things that just stood out that was interesting, and he just says, even your IRAs aren't safe as Washington starts floating the idea that these accounts should be required to hold a certain amount of government bonds. I hadn't heard that, so I'm curious. I was talking to Chase about it, and I was going to Google some stuff beforehand. Just because it's in print doesn't mean it's real, but odds are probably pretty good that somebody suggested the idea. I just thought it'd be an interesting thing to float out there.
Yeah, I think, obviously, right, like it's on the internet, so it must be true. In this case, it's in print, so it must, obviously not always the case, right? But in the general sense, it would be tough for me to believe that someone like that is going to go on the stage like that and say something like that without at least some cursory example or some sort of proof out that it actually happened. And the fact that we deal with so many people that use self-directed accounts for different types of investing or whatever, it would be fascinating to see this type of transition kind of come about regarding all of this. Like I said when we were talking about it pre-show, it's like, look, we'll give you the same protections of a traditional IRA. You can decide where you want all the money to go. It can be Roth, tax-free, all of this goodness. But the trade-off is you're going to have to hold a percentage of that. I'm not excited about it.
No, that would be horrible, dude.
Yeah, but it wouldn't surprise me if they said it.
Well, it would be surprising. I'm
saying it.
The right
yes,
is going down
it would
fast if that got approved.
Yeah. That would be.
This is when you start hearing people talk about they're moving.
I'm going to Canada or
wherever. Yeah,
legally.
What was the last thing you had?
Last thing that we had to talk about. We'll be linking it up in the show notes. There's obviously no way to link this up auditorily through a podcast here. But I did a webinar last week with the guys over at Flip Nerd, specifically Mike Hambright himself. Flip Nerd being a really good podcast about real estate investing. They've got some resources over there on their website. It's kind of like a Bigger Pockets baby brother type thing. They've got a lot of great resources, a lot of interesting stuff out there. It's traditionally focused more on that fix and flip, wholesale type real estate investing. But in this case, I did a webinar for them with them talking all about branding, how to brand yourself, the importance of branding, things like that. Two things of interest that I wanted to talk about here that I really enjoyed talking about on that webinar. It was about an hour long, and like I said, we'll have a link up in the show notes. But one of the things I mentioned was a quote from one of my mentors, kind of in the marketing strategy branding space, which is your brand is a commonly held set of beliefs about who you are and what you deliver. And I love that idea. It really encapsulates this idea that you can't really create your brand anymore. You could try. You could come to the marketplace with just a ton of money and really try to, build this brand, cobble this brand together and say, I'm the biggest, I'm the baddest, and really try to come in with that Mad Men style mentality. But the way that the internet is today and the way that connectivity operates today, to a certain extent, your brand is a story given to you from the people that you interact with. Like, if you are a terrible person, it's eventually going to come to light. If you are a bad company, if you are ripping people off, or if you're really great and you're doing amazing things, like your brand is going to be built based on your ability to deliver on the promise that you're making, whatever that promise might be. I'm doing real estate investing and I can, blah, 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 help you with this, help you with that, whatever. If that's the promise, how are you delivering against it? We make the best coffee in the world. If that's your promise, how are you delivering against it? And that will be how that brand is going to be built up, that commonly held set of beliefs about who you are and what you deliver. And I love that. I love that concept and that idea. And one of the other things I mentioned was a great concept that came from, and this was in the pitfalls to branding section of the webinar. It's an idea that came from, to me, from Seth Godin about taking the long cut, about stop focusing. You really need to stop focusing on what the internet says you need to be doing now, which is that life hack, that shortcut, that, how do we short circuit the system to figure out our way to success? And instead, focus on the long cut. What is the longest path I can take to success? What is, especially when you view it through the lens of branding, it's this idea that what is it going to take to understand that it isn't about speed, it's about momentum. And if my goal is X dollars a month, let's say in passive income, and I stop and I go, okay, if I had 10 years, right? I just turned 32. Birthday was just a couple weeks ago. We talked about it. If I wanted to spend the next 10 years till I'm 42 and I wanted to have X dollars in passive income, and I spread that out and I say, well, that means I got to do 2 deals a year. That's my long cut, right? I've got to do 2 deals a year that generate X in passive income, and we're moving on down the line, right? Well, that's great. And that's a really realistic way to think about that. But you, Robby, know better than anybody else that that's probably not how it's going to work out. You're going to set your sights on 2, and then there's probably going to be a third. And then the second year, you're probably going to crush, 4 to 5 deals. But by supplanting yourself in this perspective of the long cut and not, how can I justify or rationalize this deal to get it done? Or how can I, which is rationalizing and justifying and undermining your brand a lot of times. But cementing yourself in this idea that I'm willing, it's what we did with this podcast. I'm willing to go the long way. I'm willing to go the way other people aren't going to go. I'm not going to say, I'm new hot shit on the block and I'm amazing and all this kind of stuff. It's really cementing yourself in the concept that I'm here for the long haul, and I'm here to do it right all the way to the end. And then all of a sudden, you have this brand and this reputation that it's not going to take you 10 years. It'd be crazy if it even took you 5. But by committing to that at the beginning.
Yeah, but see, most people won't do the year or the year and a half to get to the 2 to the 5 to the whatever. Because they think it's going to take 10 years.
Right. But it's hilarious to me that people want to spout off these cliches or sayings about anywhere worth going is worth the trek, or no place worth going has a shortcut, or whatever, right? They're willing to say all of that stuff, right? Because that's really great and pithy and wonderful. But the second they want to go build a business that's, just amazing and all this other stuff, they're trying to find the shortcut to get there. What's the fastest way I can do this? it's this bizarre duality in the things that someone's going to say and then the actions they're willing to take and the effort they're willing to put forward that I feel is obviously the massive problem here. And that's what's going to deplete your brand. That's the person who goes and jumps on this MLM strategy or this kind of thing or this kind of. It's impossible to build that brand up without committing to the long way, the long cut in the beginning, instead of trying to go the shortcut like everyone else. Like no business or brand that you love or buy from today did the shortcut. The Nikes, the Starbuckses, the Amazons, all of these companies were there and cemented themselves and committed themselves. There's a really great story, actually, that Seth Godin tells. And I know we were probably going to have a short show here, and it just kind of became what it is. But he tells this awesome story about Nike. Back when Nike was, new and back when things like the Sears catalog was like a big deal, he made a deal that he would sell Nike shoes in all of the Sears stores across America, right? He said, but that's contingent upon the fact that you cannot run a Nike ad in your kind of your Sunday circulars, right? You're not going to run a sale or some sort of basically devalue my brand by running us against all these other sales and all this kind of stuff in your Sunday circular, right? And they agreed. So they started selling Nikes in the store. Everything was great. Partnership went really, really well. Until one day, some young, enterprising guy in their advertising room didn't know of this agreement, I guess. And he put together and had a massive mail out in their Sunday mailer of Nike shoes. The very next day, Phil Knight calls Sears, rips all of his stuff out of their stores. Like, boom, done, right? So, all like freaking out, all of these higher ups at Sears were trying to get him on the phone, He's like, no, we're done. I don't even want to take their call. So then they get on a plane, 4 or 5 of these execs, they fly out to the West Coast, Oregon or what have you, wherever they're headquartered at, right? And they go to Nike HQ, and they're like, we need to see Phil. Like this is a mistake, right? What?
They went to Beaverton, Oregon.
There you go. This was a mistake. We're sorry. We need to speak to Phil. So he basically had them sit in the lobby from sun up to sundown. Didn't see them the whole time. And then made them go back home, and that they've never been in a Sears store since. But it was a twofold understanding from both the consumer side, basically saying, like, look, this is our promise. This is what we're going to deliver against. We're not going to devalue our brand. We're not going to whatever. But it was also really important. Now, I'm not saying you got to shame people all the time, but it's also really important for the internals, for the people that worked at Nike, to walk into the building, walk in and out, have this ethos that, like, he's going to make, this was back when Sears was like a big deal. He's going to make these execs sit here in the lobby and basically shame them for 8-9 hours. That's where you work. You work at a place that holds itself to the standard of X. And the second somebody tries to question that or not work to that level or not try to exceed it, you're out. You're on the outside. And that's it. So it's just this really interesting idea. That's the long cut. That's the, how many times and how many places would you have seen someone go, yeah, it was kind of a mistake, whatever, I get it. What were sales? Well, sales were pretty good on Sunday. Well, maybe we need to reevaluate he wasn't about that. He just cut him off. Done. Because of where he wanted his brand to sit and the ethos he wanted to surround what it was they were trying to build. So it's just this really interesting idea of going that long way. And like you said, most people aren't going to commit. Most people aren't going to commit to that 1 year, year and a half, because of what it's going to take to go through the process. Anyway, so.
It's also about knowing your why, and then you know how long your long cut is.
Absolutely. Definitely. No question. But we talked about that. Everybody's talking about that. There's no one not talking about that.
All right.
I didn't mean that negatively. I just meant in general, if like a person is listening to this show and they aren't familiar with that concept, I would be blown away. But yes, knowing your why is very important. In fact, there's a great book called Start With Your Why or whatever by the guy that has like one of the most watched TED videos of all time. I can't think of it. We'll link it up in the show notes. Anyway, anything else for the people, Mr. Woods?
I just got an email from the attorney in Chicago telling me another tenant has another month to vacate a property before I have to put the possession order against the sheriff. Man, they just love giving out free rent in Chicago.
Chicago. If you don't want to pay your bills, go live there.
I should be quiet. I keep buying up there too. I know what I'm getting into now.
Yeah, you know, it's
like if you know, you date an ex. Listen, you know what you're getting into. You know what you're getting into.
That was literally the example I was going to give, but I just didn't want to give it, so I'm glad that you threw it
Probably better that one comes from me than you anyway.
That is probably better. Alrighty, guys, we appreciate you so much. We've got some really great interviews lined up over the next couple of weeks for you guys. Cannot wait to get those out to you. As always, be sure to go check out the show notes where everything we've talked about in this episode, including a link to that branding webinar, will be. So be sure to check that out. If this is your first time here, head over to iTunes, give us a rating and a review. We would appreciate it. It helps. And as always, be sure to tell 5 other people you know this week about the Note MBA podcast. Catch you guys later.
All right, guys. Have a good one.